Well, welcome. My name is Kate Harmon. I'm the Director of Cross-Campus Engagement for the Lundquist Center for Entrepreneurship. And today I'm really excited to have with us Leila Mozaffarian, who is the Account Executive at Sprouts Social. Leila, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
I thought we would start off by talking a little bit about your background. You're a fairly recent alum, so I thought you could kind of describe to us a little bit about what you majored in college, what kind of activities you were involved in, and take us up through your current role right now at Sprout Social.
Yeah, totally. So first off, thank you so much for having me, Kate. I really appreciate it. I majored in business with a double concentration in marketing and entrepreneurship, and then I also had a minor in psychology. I was involved in quite a few extracurricular activities, from the entrepreneurship club to women in business, the American Marketing Association, all at the business school. But I also tried to do things outside of just the business school, such as Relay for Life, to take on more leadership roles by being on the committee. And then during my sophomore and junior year, I was a resident assistant. My senior year, I worked two marketing jobs specifically, since I was concentrating in that, at both Kaplan Test Prep and then a startup called Joy Run. And I was a brand ambassador for both. During my senior year, I also started an LLC called Moscow, with the amazing help of yourself and a few others at the business school. And then my first job out of college was a company called ZipWhip, a tech startup. We provided a business text messaging solution across the US and Canada. And then I'm currently with Sprout Social, with as a social media marketing and analytics company, and we work on a global level.
Great. Well, let's talk a little bit about your entrepreneurial endeavors in college. You mentioned that you started your own business, Moscow LLC, and actually launched a product called Duck Feet with the help of the UO Duck Stores Oregon Incubator Program. Can you explain a little bit about why you wanted to start your own business and what you learned from that experience?
Of course. So I started Moscow LLC because I wanted to leave the university with having left a mark in my own way outside of just being a student. And I learned more through that experience, I think, than I could have ever have dreamt of. I brought an inventory for the product, and essentially Duck Feet is like a rain jacket for your shoes. So I launched that at the Duck Store in all of their locations as I graduated, basically. And then it also went online through a licensing agreement. So I took the product and stuck the O on there so that we could launch them in the actual Duck stores. And one thing that I think stood out for me from my experience was that I didn't spend a dime of my own money to start this. And the only reason I say that is because I think so many of us, entrepreneurs, especially as students, think that we need to have some sort of savings to start a business of our own. But what I did instead was I got involved with multiple business competitions where I would present to panels for competition prize money that included zero equity. So I was a part of the, Rain Eugene competition, the Quack Hatch, the Ferdy Lab, like all sorts of just competitions within Eugene. And then I ranked first to third place. And for the ones that I ranked in, I was able to get money from the investors. And that's really just like the time where you're like, man, is it great to be a student? There's like no strings attached outside of them just wishing you the best and giving you feedback on how to improve and creating mentorships. With that being said, though, I also attended the MBA competitions that I wasn't allowed to compete in Portland. But, I went to and just kind of experienced watching like true MBA students take their businesses into like next level as a team. But from the money that I saved, essentially what I did is I brought an inventory from China, licensed it at the Duck Store by using a silk screening company in Eugene, and then packaging it at home in my garage, and then taking it back to Eugene to launch it in the stores. So essentially what my day-to-day looked like is 5 days a week, I was working full-time at ZipWhip. And then on the weekends, I would drive down on Friday night, like go and drop off, inventory to get it silkscreen, have some business meetings Saturday morning, come back on a Sunday, and then just keep doing that week after week after week. And then throughout some of those weekends when it was finally like launched in the stores and game season had started, I would go through for all the home games at both the Duck Store and Autzen Stadium, so that I can introduce the product to everyone. So that was a very long explanation.
Yeah, that's very interesting. So how do you think that helped you get your first job at ZipWhip?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the experience that I had in selling to purchasing managers, so Brian was the main person I spoke with, but a variety of folks at the duck store, I had to present this solution to. I had to figure out, the contract on both sides, kind of like what am I going to be selling to someone while also kind of getting sold on going into the store. And just that interaction really, like for me, realized that I wasn't just starting a business. I was doing a lot more of sales than anything, especially because I was bringing in inventory. So that experience, the incubator program as a whole, was amazing. I was one of 10 students. I'm sorry, I was the one out of the 10 businesses there, but I was the only student. And we would just meet, go over financing, and go over the processes of how to launch a product. So those people in that room, I think, showed me what it looks like to have sales skills to present to someone to be able to get into it, because there was a lot of people who wanted to be a part of that program.
You graduated in 2016,
Mhm.
and I'm just curious, when you were, on your way to graduating, what were you thinking your career would look like? Did you want to go into sales? What was your sort of interest at that time in terms of that first job out of college?
Honestly, I think deep down, I wanted to run with Moscow LLC like all the way. I didn't want to work for someone else. I wanted to work for myself. But I quickly realized for me, the approach that I wanted to do and the vision I had, it was better to have a full time job and just learn from a small startup and see how they scale. And ZipWhip at the time had about 50 people. So I was confident that they were succeeding so I could have that job security. But they were scaling so quickly, and I wanted to see, okay, how do you fail? How do you grow? What are the things that from, like no risk on my end necessarily, how can I take all of this and apply it one day? So I started when there was 50 people. Within 3.5 years, we had 300 people. So we got to do the entire sales model as account executives, from sourcing the leads, calling on them, emailing them, setting up those meetings, doing the meetings, going through the billing and finance cycle. So while my dream was having Duck Feet as like a product that launched into this huge business, I realized that I could save a lot more money if I invested my time fully to having a job. But for a while, I got to live kind of the best of both worlds and experience both and kind of figure out for me what was the best move in focusing on one thing or both.
That's great. I know that you rapidly were promoted at ZipWhip over the 4 years that you were there, and I'm just curious. Eventually, before you left, in the last couple months, you actually had the role of senior account executive. Can you share a little bit, and you kind of already hinted at it, what it was like to work for a growing or rapidly scaling startup? And why do you think you succeeded in sales over this period?
So I would say that first and foremost, it was super hectic. We were running 100 miles an hour every single day. I think a lot of times when you go to sales roles, you have uncapped commission, which is very appealing, fresh out of college. So for me, I just realized that I can make as much money as I want, as fast as I want. And so I just invested all of my time into learning about the industry, building connections internally, both with like the team and then also externally, so I could learn and whatnot there. But I think the two things actually that really helped me succeed was, one, I was selling with empathy to customers and not just trying to solve what I think are their needs, but really selling to what their needs are instead of doing a feature or product dump, which I think oftentimes if you think of like car salesmen, a lot of times they're like, just buy it, just buy it. Instead, I was trying to ask the right questions and solve what they actually were coming to us for. And then secondly was just having persistence and never giving up when I heard no. My mindset was more so it's just one more no, closer to a yes. And so just kind of handling it that way. In the world of sales, when you believe in something so much and someone rejects the idea of it, I think it's really hard if you don't have persistence to succeed long term, especially.
That's great advice. I know within a year of you actually starting the company, you were named the top salesperson of your company, and you also set the highest software sales in the company's history. What you kind of shared a little bit about your success in terms of being empathetic and hearing what your customers wanted. Um, are there other sort of tips or areas of what you think you did well that might have led to your success?
So I think first and foremost, I just wanted to make money quickly. But I also loved being number one and receiving paychecks, but I loved making the impact on the businesses as well. You have an opportunity to work with a specific industry or all sorts of industries with people all across, the country or the world, depending on where you're working at in sales. And my favorite thing was when I'd get a customer calling me saying, I just want to thank you for like the good service that you provided me. And I think the number one thing is to understand their pain level on like a deeper level. So, as students, I think the one thing that you should do if you haven't heard of the Sandler method is look into it. Essentially, what it focuses on is asking the right questions rather than simply providing answers. So I listened to my customers. I always did my best to provide a 5-star experience, which sadly I think a lot of times we don't realize, but that's all people really want, whether you're selling to a consumer or a business. They just want to be taken care of. So I think a lot of times if you go above and beyond, it will definitely, repay you down the like in the long term, simply because you're building credibility, you're building a brand for yourself. It's kind of your own business. And so a lot of times I think when you do provide that experience, that's when you get a bunch of referrals and you can just put the phone down and take away that original cold call method and just sit there and pick up the phone and take orders because you've built a name for yourself in the industry.
Makes sense. Well, sales is often thought of as a very male-dominated industry. I'm curious, how do you think being a woman either helped or hindered your ability to be successful in this industry?
So obviously, I was in sales, a male-dominated profession, as you said, but I was also in tech, which is male-dominated, and I was selling specifically to the automotive industry, which is also male-dominated industry. So to say the least, it was painful in the beginning. I was not taken seriously. I was young, inexperienced. I didn't know what I was talking about, and I was a woman. But I think over time, I realized that everyone sees salespeople as salespeople, and it has nothing to do with your age or gender, but that really does have to do with the experience and knowledge that you have. So the one thing that I learned was it wasn't a matter of, the gender or the experience level or anything like that. I learned that, if I knew everything there was to know about the automotive industry, the personas I was selling to and catering to those specifically, in the sense that I know where they're making money, I know how they want to make more money, I know what their pain points are, I was then able to solve those issues and then develop credibility because I knew what they needed versus them kind of like thinking that I had no idea like how to do anything car related. And that does not mean that, I had never bought a car going into the industry. So I don't think it means that you have to know the ins and outs of the business. You just have to know how your solution is going to impact their business model. And then from there, you just develop credibility. And again, I think the number one thing is network in the sales world. And so I just built a ton of credibility, got a lot of referrals, and it made my life so much easier. So whenever someone questioned me or what I was selling, I would just say, here's, X, Y, and Z person who's willing to hop on a call with you to give you feedback from like me as a salesperson, but also for our product.
Very good. I know last year that you were invited to the Sales Success Summit in Austin, Texas, which was an event that highlighted the top 1% of sales performers in large organizations. Can you share a little bit about how you prepared for speaking in to such a large crowd, and what were some of the key highlights that you conveyed in your speech?
Yeah, so I had spoken to audiences of this size when I was doing the competitions in school, but I was really scared actually for this specific audience because I was selling to the top sales professionals across companies like all around the world. So SalesLoft, Outreach, Microsoft, LinkedIn. And I was on the younger side of the group, which made me a little more worried. And I was worried that I wouldn't be taken seriously due to my lack of experience in sales specifically. I created and went over my pitch maybe 100 times at least. But in the end, I got a standing ovation. So many people reached out. They were so great. I had folks just reach out to me even months later, like literally yesterday, and just the impact that I made on them from what was being said. And the topic that I was talking about specifically was the productivity mindset, on basically how to keep going even when things get tough. So sales is obviously a hard thing to do. You're constantly getting rejected and then waking up the next morning looking forward to getting more rejections. So I focused my mindset on kind of, how can you remain productive and how can you change like the way that your sales cycle works and how can you keep kind of overcoming these obstacles. So that's what I presented on. And it was really focused on my experience specifically because at the time my father was really ill. I was working full time, and being a full-time caregiver, it's really hard emotionally and just with the lack of time and kind of keeping up with everything. So I would not recommend just listening to my presentation, but I think any of the people in that kind of group, the Sales Success Media led by Scott Ingram. And the reason I say that is because it's not just like a sales book where they tell you sales techniques. It's from real people who have actually experienced being in sales from major companies or small startups like mine. So if you're looking for like actual real advice, that would definitely be where I'd go. They have podcasts, they have books, they have obviously the summit and things of that nature. So a lot of times I think if you're looking to go into the sales world, hear and listen to see what the experiences are from those out there who have gone through it already.
I'm curious, what kind of roles or sort of career pathway do you now envision for yourself going forward?
Yeah, I think due to some of the success I had, I've been reached out to by a lot of different businesses across the country, but none of them really stood out or felt right to me for like years on end. I was really happy. I was growing. I was making, I was hitting my quota and things of that nature. So I just started literally a month ago working for another SaaS company called Sprout Social, as we talked about. Again, social media management software. And honestly, I could not be happier where I am now. The reason that I think I want to be here, like my main goal basically is to learn, grow, and move up in my career in both sales, but also hopefully management down the road. I want to kind of be in sales a little bit longer, pick up some more techniques, work at another company, experience new industries, and then try to, help develop and coach others in doing the same. But I think the reason I kind of went from teeny tiny startup, so to speak, to a little bit of a larger, like instead of 300 people moving to 1,500 people is because I think it's small enough to where I can personally make an impact, but large enough to where I can feel uncomfortable so that I can continue to learn and grow. So that's why I've kind of where I'm at right now. So I guess growth just, outside of training and going into the real sales cycle of everything.
That's great, and I know you had to do all your training remotely. So kudos for you for being able to start during this challenging time period. I'm curious, as you look back over your college career, which again wasn't too far ago, for 4 years or so, would you have done anything differently to help prepare you for where you are today? Would there be any sort of areas of study or skill development that you wish you would have had that you might have been able to be more successful at today?
I don't necessarily regret anything from college. I feel like I did what I wanted in the sense of moving forward my career. I worked different jobs. I was a full-time student, got involved with extracurriculars, the Moscow business, while also trying to maintain a social life in my spare time. But one thing that I would have changed if I could is that I would have started my business during my junior year. I think when you enter the business program junior year, a lot of times you're figuring out which concentration you want to go to. You have all these different things going on. But I could have learned so much more from the easy connections, many, many mentors who are there and ready to help. There's so many resources at your disposal as a student that you just don't realize. And I would hear that time and time again, but I just never truly understood that when you message someone and you say, I am a student, they are so much more likely to help you. And then during senior year too, time just flies. You have so many activities going on. You're trying to wrap things up. And when I look back, I mean, if I had started my project junior, I would have learned more. I could have done a little slower. I wouldn't have to go to Seattle and back to Eugene so many times. And maybe I would have been more successful and been able to do that full time. So that's something that I always wonder about. But if I could go back, I mean, I remember there was sophomores who were working on businesses, and I just think to myself, I could have had 2 years instead of 9 months to start a business. And that would have just been such a better experience because right afterwards I could continue to network and learn from what was happening instead of trying to maintain a real work life versus, a project that I was doing on the side. So the number one thing is I think obviously get involved as much as possible and learn as much as possible, but also try to just take the risk as early as possible if you can.
That's great. Great advice. Well, let's end on a last question. I know that there's something like 50% of the students graduating from our College of Business end up going into sales. If you were to give them any kind of advice to be successful in having a sales career, what kind of things would you share with them?
My recommendation, if you're going specifically in sales, would be to reach out to salespeople at the company that you'd like to work for. If you can figure out through their LinkedIn or some profile and in any way, try to find the top performers and ask them what the culture is like. So instead of looking at, compensation or anything like that, a lot of times what you'll find is you might be paid a lot, but you end up super unhappy. You don't grow, you don't move up the ladder. And the reason I say this is because sales dips into basically every single department. So you need to go somewhere where you can rely on those around you. My base originally was not something insane when I left college, and I was like, oh gosh, I could have taken this way better offer, but this just feels right. Like for whatever reason, it feels like. And over time, as I made money by closing deals and earning promotions, I realized that I was moving, past a lot of my friends who were working at these top brand name companies in the Seattle area. But I think they started off going there for the money. They didn't get promoted. They didn't get to grow. They didn't get to do a lot of the things like take the risk of being in a small, community or just being at a company that has the right culture to help, with both short and long-term success. I think the beauty of sales is that you'll be noticed when you perform well. And so down the road as well, more and more companies will want you. And when I say that, just to kind of give a personal example for me, I mean, in the last few years and the success that I've had or my name being dropped here and there, I didn't want to work at any company that just was like, oh, here's like the compensation structure that we have for you. And like, here's what's so great about it. I knew that I wanted to be at Sprout Social specifically because I had spoken to the manager that I'm working for now for a year and a half, stayed in touch, learned more about the people. And I would say that the number one reason that I'm there is literally because I know that he's going to be a great mentor and coach for me so that I can succeed, so that I can make my sales, so that I can learn about the industry, so I can move forward, and not just be in a sales role that is seen as like a short-term, 9 to 12 month and then change a job, but more so somewhere where I can be 3 to 5 years to grow my career and succeed in and be in an environment where people truly care about not only each other, but the company as a whole and obviously the customers.
That's excellent advice. Thank you. Leila Mozaffarian, the account executive at Sprout Social. Thank you so much, Leila, for sharing your story and advice today with our students.
Thank you so much for all of your time.